I never thought a Monday morning meeting could end with a stapler flying at my face, but that's exactly how my nightmare started. It was supposed to be a routine briefing. Just me, the team, and Ethan. My boss's 20-something nephew who had recently joined for experience. Everyone knew what that really meant. He wasn't there to learn. He was there to play pretend while the rest of us cleaned up his messes. He'd been given authority he didn't earn, a title he didn't deserve, and an attitude big enough to fill the entire boardroom. And that day, he wanted to show it off. The meeting started simple. We were finalizing the client presentation that I had spent 3 weeks perfecting. Numbers, visuals, projections, all cross-checked and polished. But 5 minutes in, Ethan interrupted me with a smirk and said, "Actually, I've got a few changes." He clicked his laptop open and started displaying a new version of my work. One that was completely butchered. Charts removed, data twisted, his name on the first slide, mine nowhere. At first I thought it was a misunderstanding. "Ethan, that's not the final file," I said calmly. "That's the early draft. You're missing the Q3 financials." He just leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, I know." I simplified it. Clients don't like complicated stuff. I could feel the tension in the room. My coworkers avoided my eyes. No one wanted to challenge the golden nephew. But something inside me refused to let it go. "You removed verified data," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "That's not simplifying, that's falsifying," he laughed. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. It's just numbers. We'll make them look good later." That sentence. "We'll make them look good later." It hit me like a punch. I'd worked too hard, too long, to let someone twist my integrity into his little PR stunt. So I stood up. "Ethan, we're not changing data to make ourselves look better. You're jeopardizing the deal." His smirk faded. He wasn't used to anyone talking back, especially not me. "Sit down," he snapped. I didn't. "If this is how you plan to present to the client, I'm not attaching my name to it." And that's when it happened. He slammed his laptop shut, stood up, and threw the stapler across the table. It wasn't a toss. It was a full swing. The metal hit my shoulder, sharp enough to sting but not enough to injure. For a second, the entire room froze. Then came the silence, the kind that burns. Ethan's chest was heaving. My coworkers looked horrified. One of them even gasped. And before anyone could react, the conference room door opened. The client walked in. Mr. Delaney, the regional director of our biggest account. The man we were supposed to impress that morning. He stood there, briefcase in hand, staring at the scene like he'd walked into a crime. His eyes moved from me, to the stapler on the floor, to Ethan. "What's going on here?" he asked. No one spoke, not even Ethan. I straightened my jacket and forced a calm I didn't feel. "Just a small disagreement over presentation ethics." Delaney's gaze sharpened. "Ethics?" Ethan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "It was just, she was being disrespectful." Delaney cut him off. "By existing?" The room turned ice cold. You could see the panic in Ethan's face as he realized the client had just witnessed his meltdown. But for me, something deeper clicked. A quiet, simmering awareness that this wasn't the end. This was the beginning, because what happened next would unravel everything. The stapler was just the spark that lit the fuse on months of buried corruption, favoritism, and lies. And by the time I was done, Ethan wouldn't just lose his fake position. He'd drag the entire company down with him. After that meeting, the atmosphere inside the office changed overnight. It wasn't just awkward. It was poisoned. Word of the stapler incident spread faster than wildfire. By lunch, everyone knew. By the next morning, even HR was whispering. Yet somehow Ethan walked around like nothing had happened. No apology, no accountability. Just smug silence and the faint smell of entitlement following him wherever he went. The client meeting was canceled that day. Officially, rescheduled. Unofficially, Delaney had demanded an internal review before any further dealings. My manager, Mr. Hughes, called me into his office that afternoon, a glass-walled box that offered privacy to no one. He closed the door and sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, Claire," he said, using that tired tone people use when they're about to betray you softly. "Ethan's young. He overreacted. Let's just move forward. Move forward?" I repeated. He threw office equipment at me in a client meeting. "I understand." Hughes said quickly. And I'm not excusing it. But he's the CEO's nephew. You know how delicate this is. The last thing we need is drama. The word drama cut deeper than the stapler ever did. He wasn't talking about professionalism. He was talking about protection. Not for me, but for the family name. I realized then that the company's moral compass didn't point north anymore. It spun wherever power decided. Still, I didn't protest further. I nodded, walked out, and returned to my desk. On the surface, I was calm. Inside, something had shifted. A quiet, deliberate switch had flipped. I'd always played by the rules, always believed that good work spoke for itself. But that day, I learned that in corrupted systems, silence only serves the guilty. Over the next week, Ethan avoided me in public but retaliated in subtle ways. Accidentally, removing me from project emails, changing shared file access, whispering rumors about my temper. The same people who used to greet me with respect now looked at me with hesitant politeness, unsure which side to stand on. But I didn't fight it. Not yet. I watched. I listened. I documented. Then came the second blow. HR called me in, this time with a formal note on my record for unprofessional behavior during the meeting. I almost laughed. They were rewriting history right in front of me, twisting the narrative until the stapler incident became my fault. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying every moment. Every lie, every cover-up, my name, my reputation, my years of work, all hanging by a thread because a spoiled man-child couldn't handle being challenged. But that's when I noticed something interesting. In Ethan's version of the project, the one he tried to present, there were missing numbers in the expense sheet, missing entries that didn't match the official budget reports I had personally signed off on. When I cross-checked the internal files, I found discrepancies. Small, scattered, but deliberate. Money was being moved. Quietly. Hidden in miscellaneous allocations and vendor adjustments. It wasn't just incompetence. It was theft, and the best part? Every digital trail pointed back to Ethan's access ID. I leaned back, a slow smile forming. Suddenly the stapler didn't matter anymore. Because if I played this right, that one violent outburst wouldn't just expose his temper. It would expose everything he'd been covering up. The next morning, I walked into the office calm and composed. I greeted Ethan with a polite nod, even thanked him for his feedback in front of others. He smirked, thinking he'd won. He had no idea that I'd already started downloading the access logs. From that day on, the office became my battlefield. Every smile a disguise, every routine action a strategic move. I stopped reacting emotionally. That's what Ethan wanted. Instead, I learned to play his game, quietly. Each morning I arrived early, long before the others. I'd make coffee, open my laptop, and run silent queries through our internal database, tracing every transaction Ethan had touched in the last 6 months. The deeper I went, the more rotten it became. Vendor payments that didn't exist, ghost clients billed for consulting services, and under each signature block, Ethan's initials. But what truly terrified me wasn't his carelessness. It was how confident he'd been that no one would check. Still, I couldn't move yet. The evidence was growing, but incomplete. One wrong move and the company would cover for him again. I needed something undeniable. Something that couldn't be rewritten as a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior escalated. He'd swagger through the corridors, pretending to forget my name, calling me the analyst as if I were some intern. He'd CC me on emails just to embarrass me, always adding comments like, "Let's keep it simple this time." Each jab landed, but I never reacted. I just smiled. That smile scared him more than my anger ever could. One afternoon during a team review, he pushed too far. He accidentally deleted one of my slides right before the presentation. The others laughed awkwardly, but I caught the flicker of fear in his eyes when I said softly, "It's okay. I keep backups." He didn't know the real meaning behind those words. That night, while most people were at happy hour, I stayed late. The security guard had gotten used to me working overtime. I used that trust to my advantage. Our finance portal logged every access, who opened which file at what time. When I pulled Ethan's record, my suspicion was confirmed. He'd been making late-night edits, approving vendor payments that didn't match the invoices. Some were even tied to shell companies registered under a name I didn't recognize, EM Consulting. I almost laughed. Subtle as a brick, I started saving everything: screenshots, transaction logs, emails. Each piece became part of a puzzle I intended to present to someone who couldn't be silenced. But before I could, the company's annual audit notice hit my inbox. My heart nearly stopped. The external audit was scheduled in 3 weeks. If I played it right, that audit would do the work for me. But I had to make sure the right people saw the right files, and the wrong people didn't know I was behind it. From then on, every step was calculated. I copied files onto encrypted drives, printed key documents, and locked them in a folder labeled Market Forecast Drafts. No one ever opened those. But while I was building my silent case, Ethan was spinning a louder one. He started feeding HR stories about how I couldn't handle pressure, that I'd raised my voice during meetings, that he was concerned about my behavior. Classic manipulation. Paint the victim as unstable before the truth comes out. And it was working. HR started checking in, just to see how I was doing. My manager stopped inviting me to key calls. The room got colder every day, but they didn't realize, the more they pushed me out, the freer I became. No eyes watching meant I could move in the shadows. One evening, I overheard a conversation outside the copy room. Ethan's voice low and hurried. "Just make sure the audit file doesn't include those accounts. I'll handle the rest." He wasn't careful anymore. Arrogance made him sloppy. I stayed silent, waited until the footsteps faded, then went inside. On the copier glass was a half-printed sheet. The header read, "Client Expense Breakdown, EM Consulting." The trail had just led straight into the audit department. I folded the page and slipped it into my folder. My pulse was steady now, not frantic. The plan was forming, cold, precise, inevitable. Ethan thought he'd buried me under rumors and favoritism. But he'd forgotten one thing. In finance, every lie leaves a footprint, and I had just learned how to follow his all the way to the top. The betrayal didn't arrive with drama or shouting. It came quietly, tucked inside an email that landed in my inbox at 9:13 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject: Performance Review. Immediate action required. I opened it, half expecting another passive-aggressive memo. Instead, it was a formal notice from HR. My access to several client accounts had been temporarily suspended pending an internal investigation. Investigation. That word froze me. I read it twice, then a third time. They were investigating me. I marched straight to HR, and the expression on the manager's face told me everything before she even spoke. "Claire," she began gently, "we've received reports of data tampering under your credentials." I almost laughed. "Data tampering? You think I changed the financial records? It's not personal," she said in that polished corporate tone that always precedes injustice. "We just have to follow protocol. It seems some files were edited from your login, outside of business hours." My heart pounded. Not from guilt, but from realization. Ethan had used my own audit trail against me. He knew I'd been collecting data after hours. He must have duplicated those records and framed them to look like I'd been the one manipulating them. The trap was clean, surgical, and everyone believed it. Because who would question the CEO's nephew? I walked out of HR with a cold, trembling fury building in my chest. The office looked different now. The same glass walls, the same hum of fluorescent lights. But suddenly, every reflection looked like an enemy. By noon, the whispers had started again. A few colleagues who used to stop by my desk avoided eye contact. One even moved seats. Ethan, of course, played the concerned colleague perfectly. "I just hope she's okay," I overheard him saying. "She's been under a lot of stress." That line made my stomach twist. He wasn't just trying to ruin my career. He was rewriting me into a cautionary tale. And then, as if to add insult to injury, my manager, Hughes, called me into his office once more. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "Claire," he said, "I think it's best you take a short leave while this clears up. It'll help everyone cool down, help everyone. Not me. Them." I realized then that the company had chosen its side. Not truth, not fairness, but comfort. They'd rather protect the family name than risk the scandal of acknowledging Ethan's corruption. When I got home that evening, the weight of it finally hit. I'd been loyal for 8 years. I'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, sleep, and for what? To be thrown under the bus because I had more integrity than someone born with a better last name. I sat in the dark for hours, staring at my laptop. The folder marked Market Forecast Drafts glowed faintly on the screen. Inside it lay every file, every piece of proof, my invisible shield that no one knew existed. For a moment, I considered just sending it all to HR, ending it right there. But then I remembered the tone in their voice, the fake concern, the way Hughes looked relieved to push me out. If I gave them everything now, they'd bury it, just like they buried every complaint before mine. No, this wouldn't end in silence. Not this time. So I opened a blank document and started mapping out everything. The timeline, the accounts, the audit schedule, the client chain of command. And at the center of it all, one name, Ethan Moore. That's when I noticed something new. The EM Consulting account had one payment tagged as client liaison bonus, and the recipient wasn't Ethan. It was someone higher. Someone I'd never suspect. Hughes. The audit wasn't just covering for Ethan. It was protecting both of them. The betrayal wasn't just from a spoiled nephew. It was from the man I'd trusted for years. The one who'd pretended to understand, while quietly pocketing the benefits. That night, something in me hardened. I wasn't just going to clear my name anymore. I was going to take theirs apart, piece by piece, signature by signature, until the truth was too loud for anyone to silence. I didn't want to win with noise. I wanted to win with proof. Calm, unarguable proof that would force their hands. Revenge, I decided, had to be surgical. No theatrics, no public shaming that could be shrugged off as bitterness. Just one clean reveal that would collapse their lies like glass. First rule, use the system against itself. The audit was my ally if I could make sure the right pockets opened. So I began building a map, not of grudges, but of documents. Every transaction, every login, every emailed approval. I organized it like a prosecutor preparing a case. Dates, times, recipients, duplicate entries circled in red in my head. Second rule, cover my tracks. If I'd been framed once, I could be framed again. I encrypted copies of everything and hid them where no one thought to look. A password-protected drive inside a folder labeled with something boring and internal. I kept a running log of where I put things, so the trail led only where I wanted it to. Third rule, create a witness they couldn't ignore. I needed someone outside the company who could pull the thread without bias. The auditor was external, so I planned to nudge the audit's attention toward specific accounts. EM Consulting, client liaison bonus, and the odd vendor entries that had always felt like sand in the gears. But nudging required plausible context. I drafted concise notes that would look like routine flags an analyst might send. Unusual vendor reconciliation found in Q2. Recommend verification. Neutral language. Precise references. No emotion. If it read like alarm raised by procedure, the auditor would act. If it read like revenge, it would be dismissed. Fourth rule. Bait them with what they feared most. Exposure. Executives panic about reputation and contracts. I used that. I prepared an anonymous packet for the audit firm. The orphaned copier page. Screenshots of late-night edits with timestamps. A trail of vendor payments to shell companies. And a ledger that showed client liaison bonus routing upward. I didn't accuse anyone by name. I let the document speak. Names would appear naturally when the auditor followed the money. Fifth rule, force a confrontation where the client was watching. Delaney had been in the building the day of the stapler. He cared about numbers and integrity more than corporate politics. I drafted a brief note to his assistant, professional, sparse, suggesting we reschedule the meeting only after the audit review was completed. I didn't mention Ethan or Hughes. I only asked that the client be present for the final review. He was the perfect neutral witness, someone whose demand for transparency would apply pressure the board couldn't ignore. Then came the hardest part, patience. I watched them spin and settle. I waited as Ethan's arrogance blinded him to small mistakes. I watched Hughes stash signatures in habitually overlooked files, thinking no one paid attention to the minutiae. I waited until their confidence created its own vulnerability. I also set a decoy. I leaked an edited, innocent-looking slide into the shared drive with metadata that suggested it had been created from my machine. It was a controlled burn, a tiny, believable inconsistency I allowed to be found. When HR pounced on it, their focus narrowed exactly where I needed it. While they chased shadows, the auditor followed the money. Every move was cold, methodical. No yelling in corridors, no dramatic cries. I practiced my calm voice for the inevitable meetings, rehearsed the sequence of documents I would reveal, and imagined the silence that would follow each new fact. I prepared for denials, for gaslighting, for the inevitable attempts to discredit me. For every defense they might raise, I found a document that answered it. On the morning the audit team requested access to EM Consulting's files, my heart beat steady, not from fear, but from anticipation. I'd done the invisible work. The trap had been set with other people's paper and their own arrogance. All that remained was for the auditor to pull the string. And yet, even as I watched the first auditors arrive, a smaller worry crept in. What if they moved faster than I expected? What if Hughes smelled the wind and tried to bury the evidence? I had one contingency left, a single sealed packet sent to Delaney, printed copies of the most damning documents marked, "If anything happens to my testimony, open." I hadn't sent it yet. I wanted to use it only if the board tried to silence the audit by any means necessary. The trap was near perfect. But perfection requires timing, and timing is a gamble. I straightened my jacket, slid the final encrypted drive into my bag, and walked toward the conference room where the auditors were meeting with Hughes. The door clicked shut behind me. My pulse was a slow metronome. The stakes were no longer just my career. They were the truth against a family name. And for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Except I wasn't the only one holding secrets. The audit began on a Wednesday. Cold, gray skies pressing against the glass windows as if the city itself was holding its breath. I sat in the corner of the boardroom, quiet, expressionless, pretending to take notes while every word around the table dripped with tension. Ethan was all confidence again, flashing that fake smile that fooled no one who'd ever met his eyes long enough. Hughes sat beside him, calm but pale, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. Across from them, the lead auditor flipped through files, thick binders filled with numbers I knew better than anyone. Then, the shift happened. The auditor frowned, flipped a page, and looked directly at Hughes. "Mr. Hughes, could you clarify this transaction? The payment to EM Consulting. The same entity appears multiple times under different departments." Silence. Ethan shifted. Hughes cleared his throat. "That's probably a vendor duplication. We'll check." The auditor didn't blink. Interesting, because the account routing number belongs to an individual, not a vendor. "Care to explain?" The air cracked. You could almost hear Ethan's breath catch. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The trap was doing its job. For the next 20 minutes, the auditors dissected every inconsistency, every clerical error, every missing document, every adjusted total. Their tone was polite, but surgical. And with each question, Ethan's confidence eroded, layer by layer. Then came the final blow. The auditor slid a printed sheet onto the table, the copier page I'd found weeks ago. "This document was found in your department's waste bin," she said evenly. "It references a client expense breakdown signed off under both of your credentials. Would either of you like to explain how that's possible?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Hughes tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "There must be some misunderstanding." The auditor nodded slowly. "Of course. We'll include this in our report to the board." And just like that, they were done. The moment the auditors left the room, Ethan turned on me. "You did this!" he hissed, his voice trembling. I met his stare calmly. "No," I said softly. "The numbers did." He lunged from his chair, but Hughes grabbed his arm, not to stop him, but to pull him back in panic. "Enough!" Hughes snapped, but there was fear in his tone. The facade was cracking. That's when the door opened, and in walked Delaney, the client. He looked around the room slowly, his eyes falling on the chaos, the tension, the stack of audit reports in front of us. "I see my timing's perfect," he said coolly. "Seems I walked in on something interesting. Again." No one spoke. Delaney picked up the audit file, skimmed a few pages, then looked directly at Hughes. "I trusted your firm with millions," he said. "Looks like I'll be reviewing that decision." And then he turned to me. The faintest nod, just enough to tell me he'd seen enough. The silence that followed was colder than the morning air. Ethan's face had drained of all color. Hughes sat frozen, the realization of exposure sinking deep into his bones. It was over. Not with shouting or revenge speeches, but with numbers, signatures, and quiet inevitability. The fallout was swift, faster than I could have imagined. Within 48 hours, the audit report circulated through the upper board. By the end of the week, an emergency meeting was held behind closed doors, and by Monday, both Ethan and Hughes were no longer with the company. No explanations, no farewells, just an internal memo about restructuring that fooled no one. HR called me in soon after. Their tone completely changed. "Claire," they said, smiling too widely, "thank you for your cooperation during this process. We'd like to formally apologize for any misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word tasted like ash. They offered me a promotion, Hughes's position. In fact, along with a public letter of commendation for maintaining transparency under pressure. I accepted it not out of pride, but because it meant staying close enough to make sure their cleanup didn't erase the truth. When I walked through the office that day, heads turned again, but this time not out of pity or gossip. Respect had replaced whispers. Fear had turned into distance. Ethan's desk was empty, his nameplate gone. The stapler that had once bruised my shoulder sat in the storage room, forgotten and dusty. I paused by the window, watching the city skyline blur through the glass. Justice, I realized, doesn't roar, it whispers. It doesn't always come wrapped in applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like balance being restored. That night, I packed up the last of my notes, slipped the original evidence folder into my bag, and took one final look around the office that had tried to bury me. They'd wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became the reason their lies unraveled. When it was finally over, I stood in that same office, the one where I'd been humiliated, threatened, and almost broken. But now, it felt different. The air didn't carry his arrogance anymore. The desk where the stapler had flown now held fresh contracts, new clients, and a quiet sense of justice. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. People kept asking me if revenge was worth it. The truth? It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control over a place that once made me feel powerless. I didn't destroy him. I exposed the truth he tried to bury, and in doing so, I found myself again. When the investigation report was released, it spread across the firm like wildfire. It turned out my boss's nephew had a record of anger issues conveniently swept under the rug. The CEO's blind favoritism, the cover-ups, the silencing of complaints, all of it came to light. The board didn't just fire him. They questioned every executive who'd looked the other way. But I didn't celebrate his downfall. I just quietly packed my things and left a note on the desk. Respect is not optional. Months later, I joined another firm, one where talent actually meant something. My name wasn't whispered in fear anymore, but in admiration. They didn't see me as the woman who caused a scandal. They saw me as the woman who refused to stay silent. Looking back, I realized something powerful. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, through persistence, integrity, and the refusal to be small. I didn't need to fight fire with fire. I just let the truth burn on its own. This was never about revenge. It was about reminding them, and myself, that dignity isn't something anyone can take without permission. This is revenge untold. Where every betrayal meets its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.